After being in a group all the time with a producer, suddenly to be a solo artist with no producer, and no group, you know.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's quite a big jump.
While Paul was adapting to domestic life, John was fighting with his demons, and Ringo was releasing a covers album. George Harrison, always relegated and underestimated by his bandmates, was preparing for his first solo album. During the last years of the Beatles, George had composed dozens of songs that were rejected by Lennon and McCartney, and only at the end of his career did John and Paul realize the level, as a composer, that George had reached. It was too late. As a result of his songs only filling one or two spaces on the Beatles albums, George had enough material for his debut triple album. Phil Spector was amazed and said that the level and quality of George's content was endless. The result was an album composed of songs that were conceived in the Beatles era, with Phil Spector, Bob Dylan, Eric Clapton, Billy Preston, and Badfinger. George Harrison showed the world what he was able to do and released what is for many people the best album ever created by a solo Beatle. All Things Must Pass was born in the trip that George Harrison made to the US at the end of 1968. After the recording sessions of the White Album, he took a vacation to stay away from the tense panorama with his band. During his stay in Woodstock in November, Harrison became a strong friendship with the musician Bob Dylan and observed the internal structure of the band, a group in which its 5 members participated in the musical decisions in an equal way, which contrasted with the dominant role of John Lennon and Paul McCartney in the Beatles. After that visit, Harrison experienced an increase in his songwriting ability and a renewed interest in his guitar after having spent 3 years studying the sitar, as well as being part of a small and exclusive group of musicians who had managed to co-write songs with Bob Dylan. Harrison also collaborated with Clapton on the song Badge, which was a single for Cream in the spring of 1969. Back in London, and with his compositions taking a backseat in Beatles publications, Harrison filled his creativity with side projects in response to restrictions imposed within the band. His musical activity in 1969 included the production of works by Billy Preston and Doris Troy, 2 American musicians whose gospel and soul roots significantly influenced the sound of All Things Must Pass. He also recorded with the artists Leon Russell and Jack Bruce, accompanied Clapton on a small musical tour, and also joined the Hare Krishna movement as another piece of his spiritual evolution that began in 1966. Produced 2 singles from the Radha Krishna Temple, and in January of the same year, Harrison invited Phil Spector to participate in the recording of John Lennon's single, Instant Karma. This partnership led Spector to replace the work of George Martin and Glyn Johns in the production of the Get Back tapes, a project that was released in 1970 with the title changed to Let It Be. These 2 previous events would lead Spector to end up producing All Things Must Pass. The sessions began in May, but were full of interruptions. George Harrison's mother was diagnosed with cancer, so he had to return to Liverpool for a few weeks, and his mother would die a few months later. The always controversial ways of working with Spector were another factor of delay. Harrison said in an interview that Spector needed 18 beer glasses before starting to work, a situation that forced the musician to work alone in different occasions. Other delays were also due to overdubs and mixing. Harrison's album was recorded in just over 5 months, and by the end of October, the album was ready. And the time for George had come.
He had literally hundreds of songs, and each one was better than the rest. He had all this emotion built up when it released to me. I don't think he had played them to anybody, maybe Patty.
All Things Must Pass begins with the song I'd Have You Anytime, a song co-written by Harrison and Dylan in Woodstock in November of 1968. Eric Clapton played guitar, but was not credited due to contract and label issues. 4 weeks at number 1. The most commercial and famous song of his solo discography, and for many of his entire career. A song famous for its religious lyrics, George Harrison began writing My Sweet Lord in December 1969, when he, Billy Preston, and Eric Clapton were in Copenhagen, Denmark. By this time, Harrison had already written the gospel-influenced Hear Me Lord, using as his inspiration the Edwin Hawkins singer's rendition of an 18th century Christian hymn, Oh Happy Day. Harrison continued working on the theme. He completed the song with help from Preston once they had returned to London. The song turned out to be a subconscious plagiarism of He's So Fine by the Chiffons. In the end, Harrison was found guilty, and had to pay $1,599,987 of the earnings from My Sweet Lord.
I thought a lot about whether to do My Sweet Lord or not, having written it. I thought, it's really committing myself to something. There's going to be a lot of people are going to really hate me, because people fear the unknown, you see. It's some sort of instinct in people. The point was that I was sticking my neck out on the chopping block, but at the same time I thought, well, nobody's saying it. Yeah. It would be, I wish somebody else was doing it, so that, to represent.
Harrison wrote the song following his temporary departure from the Beatles in January 1969, during the troubled Get Back sessions that resulted in their Let It Be album and film. The lyrics reflect his frustration with the atmosphere in the group at the time, namely Paul McCartney's over-assertiveness and criticism of his guitar playing, John Lennon's lack of engagement with the project and dismissal of Harrison as a songwriter, and Yoko Ono's constant involvement in the band's activities. This was the first song recorded for the album and includes a great performance by Badfinger as Harrison's backing band. Towards the end of May that year, among the dozens of tracks that would be considered for his All Things Must Pass triple album, Harrison returned to several unused songs that he had written in the late 1960s. Dating from 1966, Isn't It a Pity had recently been rejected by the Beatles during the January 1969 Get Back sessions. According to EMI engineer Jeff Emmerich, Harrison had offered it for the inclusion on 1967's Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, while Beatles biographer Mark Lewison has stated that it was the first presented during sessions for the previous year's Revolver. In a taped conversation from the January 1969 Get Back sessions, Harrison reminds John Lennon that he had vetoed Isn't It a Pity 3 years before. Harrison also says he considered offering the song to Frank Sinatra. 2 versions of the song were recorded. The first one, which is this one, was not to Harrison's total liking. In his autobiography, I Me Mine, Harrison describes it as having been written very quickly, and recalls that he thought it would be a perfect, catchy pop song for Preston to record. He adds that he changed his mind once he arrived at Olympic Studios and found Preston working on more typical material, or playing his funky stuff, rather than attempt it with the Beatles during the band's concurrent Abbey Road sessions. Harrison stockpiled What Is Life with his many unused songs from that period. What Is Life peaked at number 10 on the Billboard Hot 100 and number 7 on Cashbox's Top 100 chart, making Harrison the first ex-Beatle to have 2 top 10 hits in the United States. Given during a session with Dylan on May 1, 1970, it is a modest track that contrasts to such complex songs. In author Simon Lang's view, Harrison created a characteristically melody-centric version of the song, which more clearly defines its verse and bridge sections, and eschews Dylan's preference for spontaneity in favor of oral pleasure. This song was born as a message of encouragement from Harrison to Bob Dylan. Composed the night before his appearance on the Isle of Wight Festival, author Ian English notes the Isle of Wight performance as having been a hugely important and anxious occasion for Dylan, and views Harrison's opening verse as a personal plea for him to pull out of his depression, to face the world again, and to look to the future. Harrison wrote the song in 1968 and offered it to the Beatles in January 1969 for inclusion on what became their Let It Be album in 1970. Also produced by Spector, it is one of several Harrison compositions that were turned down by the band and subsequently found acclaim on his first solo release following their breakup. Harrison biographers recognize Let It Down as an erotic love song, perhaps written to a woman other than Pattie Boyd, his wife at the time. Run of the Mill was one of the songs composed in 1970 with lyrics focused on the failed friendships within the group and the business problems surrounding Apple Corp. The song's release coincided with a falling out between Harrison and McCartney, which contributed to the latter taking legal action to dissolve the Beatles' partnership. According to American keyboardist Bobby Whitlock, the song was partly informed by Harrison's difficulties with his former Beatles bandmates and their business manager, Alan Klein, in the period immediately after the band's breakup. The song's lyrics reflect the influence of Radha Krishna Temple, whose philosophy holds that spiritual concerns override all material things. This Dylan-influenced track served as a tribute to a group of the Beatles fans who almost lived outside Abbey Road. Many of the rare photos that exist of the Beatles outside the studios between 1967 and 1970 were taken by this group. According to Derek Taylor, who was the Beatles' press officer at Apple, Harrison wrote Apple Scruffs, because the Scruffs had witnessed occasions when he was going through some bad times, and he came to hold them in great affection. This song is a tribute to a previous owner of Friar Park, George's place of residence from those days until the end of his life. It is a stunning place on the outskirts of London, far away from everything. In an October 1974 radio interview with Alan Freeman, Harrison recalled writing "Awaiting on You All" while preparing to go to bed, and mentioned it as a composition that had come easily to him. Harrison states that his inspiration for the song was Japa Yoga meditation, whereby mantras are sung and counted out on prayer beads. The subject matter deals with the transient nature of human existence, and in Harrison's All Things Must Pass, reading, words, and music combine to reflect impressions of optimism against fatalism. The music critic Ian MacDonald described All Things Must Pass as the wisest song never recorded by the Beatles, because it was considered in 1969. The lyrics reflect life's ephemeral character and the transitory nature of love. It is one of the highlights of the album. A paean to free love. It marks a departure from the more profound, spiritually oriented subject matter of much of that album. Musically, the song reflects Harrison's early experimentation with slide guitar, a technique that he was introduced to while touring with Delaney and Bonnie and Friends in December 1969. Harrison began writing the song in 1966 while still a member of the Beatles, and during a period when he had first become enamored with Hindu-aligned spirituality and other aspects of Indian culture. The subject matter is reincarnation and the need to avoid rebirth, by limiting actions and thoughts that lead to one's soul returning in another, earthbound life form. According to Harrison, after recording the first version, he decided he was unhappy with it, and the second version came about by chance weeks later, when one of the backing musicians began playing the song during a session. The so-called Isn't It a Pity, version 2, is noticeably slower than the better-known 7-minute epic reading of the song. Eric Clapton's guitar fills, phased piano from Tony Ashton, and John Barham arranged woodwinds dominate version 2. The song is in the gospel rock musical style, and the lyrics take the form of a personal prayer, in which Harrison seeks help and forgiveness from his deity. Along with My Sweet Lord, it is among the most overtly religious selections on All Things Must Pass. It was the last track on side 4 of the original LP format, and is generally viewed as the closing song on the album, disc 3 being the largely instrumental Apple Jam. Here starts the famous Apple Jam. Out of the Blue opens abruptly, with the musicians already playing a mid-tempo groove. Lasting 11 minutes, the jam is a blues instrumental. In author Simon Lang's description, the improvisation is achieved through guitar riffs and shifting dynamics over a single chord theme. Lang compares Out of the Blue to the extended jams typical of the San Francisco scene, and comments that many of those bands would have issued it as a genuine album track. It's Johnny's Birthday! It's Johnny's Birthday is a 49-second track sung to the tune of Cliff Richard's 1968 hit, Congratulations. Harrison recorded it for John Lennon's 30th birthday after Yoko Ono, Lennon's wife, had requested a musical gift from him, Donovan, and Janis Joplin to mark the occasion. Recording took place at EMI Studios on the 7th of October, as Harrison was carrying out final mixing on All Things Must Pass. Plug Me In is a hard rock track with Harrison, Clapton, and Dave Mason, each taking guitar solos. It was taped on the 18th of June, a session that marked the recording debut of Clapton, Whitlock, Rattle, and Gordon's short-lived band, Derek and the Dominoes, which had come together to help Harrison record his album. The title for I Remember Jeep originated from the name of Clapton's dog, a Weimaraner named Jeep, who had recently gone missing. The main session took place at Olympic Sound Studios on the 29th of March, 1969. Shortly before, Harrison started production on Preston's first Apple Records album, That's the Way God Planned It. The title for Thanks for the Pepperoni came from a line in a Lenny Bruce comedy album. The track is a 6-minute jam in the style of Chuck Berry's Roll Over Beethoven. Recorded at the same session as Plug Me In, it again includes guitar solos by Harrison, Clapton, and Mason. The album is officially closed here. Released on November 27, 1970 in the USA, and on November 30th in the UK, All Things Must Pass was number 1 on the official UK album chart for 8 weeks. The extent of Harrison's success surprised the music industry, and largely overshadowed Lennon's concurrently released Plastic Ono Band album, which Spector also co-produced. According to John Bergstrom of Pop Matters, as of January 2011, All Things Must Pass has sold more than Imagine and McCartney and Wings' Band on the Run combined. All Things Must Pass received almost universal critical acclaim on release, as much for the music and lyrical content as for the fact that, of all the former Beatles, it was the work of supposed junior partner George Harrison. Harrison had usually contributed just 2 songs to a Beatles album. The critics' attention was now centered on a major talent unleashed, one who'd been hidden in plain sight all those years, behind Lennon and McCartney. That the quiet Beatle was capable of such range. The stark black and white cover photo was taken on the main lawn at Friar Park by Wilkes' Camouflage Productions partner, Barry Feinstein. Commentators interpret the photograph, showing Harrison seated in the center of, and towering over, 4 comical-looking garden gnomes, as representing his removal from the Beatles' collective identity.
Let me in here.
Harrison commissioned Tom Wilkes to design a hinged box in which to house the 3 vinyl discs. Apple insider Tony Bramwell later recalled, "It was a bloody big thing. You needed arms like an orangutan to carry half a dozen." The package caused some confusion among retailers, who at the time associated boxed albums with opera or classical works. To mark the 30th anniversary of the album's release, Harrison oversaw a remastered edition of All Things Must Pass that was released in January 2001, less than a year before his death. Harrison included I Live For You as the only all-new bonus track on the 2001 reissue of All Things Must Pass. Down to the River remained unused until he reworked it as Rocking Chair in Hawaii for his final studio album, the posthumously released Brainwashed. In Spector's absence, Harrison completed the album's backing tracks and carried out preliminary overdubs, doing much of the latter work at Trident Studios with former Beatles engineer Ken Scott. Harrison completed this stage of the project on the 12th of August. He then sent early mixes of many of the songs to his co-producer, who was convalescing in Los Angeles. In January 2014, All Things Must Pass was inducted into the Grammy Hall of Fame. George Harrison was quite possibly the only Beatle who was completely satisfied with the Beatles being gone. In his own terms, Harrison told the world what he was. All Things Must Pass has transcended the decades as the best album made by a former Beatle, and still today, we continue to explore and give new meanings to this album. Comment below your impressions of the album, and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already done so. Don't forget to like us, and thanks for watching. This is Music Box.